came at the end for a bit of a sort of recap and thinking about research outputs as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, let us know if you want to reframe it in any way.
Yeah, thanks, Jonah. This might be slightly different than the advertised content. It's sort of related, but it's kind of larger in scope, and it touches on quite a few things, and it's maybe a bit ambitious in terms of what I'm really trying to do to present within the time that we have. But do feel free to stop me at any point if you want to discuss about anything in particular that I'm kind of touching at that moment. So the presentation that I've got here is roughly based on the work of Pierre Bourdieu. It's about how society works and what really matters if one wants to have a meaningful life. So I'm linking this to the poly crisis, to the meta crisis, to the meaning crisis and existential crisis that individuals might be experiencing. And then the next thing is how through this meaningful life, what actually matters is to be involved in the making of the world. So movement for a social change. I'll talk about how Bourdieu um, uh, Bourdieu's work focuses on how social structures tend to mystify their workings and create individuals unable to reflect on some aspects of the reality in themselves. And that is such a huge and in its totality problem that almost kind of makes impossible to move outside of the realm of the constraints the society places upon us. And then there are plenty of potential research topics arising from this with regards to movement building, sense making, coherence, and power dynamics in the context of social change and social transformation. Life meaning linked to being, linked to society, linked to value, linked to capital is what I'll be covering. Then ideologies and worldviews as classes, as paradigms, which touches a little bit on your paradigm shifts in social fields. And then a little bit about unconscious embodiment of habitus through pre-reflexive knowledge. So I'm trying to make like a little journey from wanting life to have a meaning, engaging with life, how society works and what's possible, and then complications um, with built-in resistance of a society to change. So I'm just going to try and share. I haven't got a presentation like you did last time. What I have is my Obsidian, and my Obsidian will attempt uh, to do something, I suppose. Can you see?
Yeah, I can see.
All right. Okay, so I think I'll start. Okay. Life meaning and being as a social construct. So Bourdieu's view is that life meaning is a social contract that emerges from our interaction with the world. And the act of meaningful interaction or engagement with the world he calls being. And it's part of philosophical topic, which sometimes goes under human condition, and is basically the exploration of what it means to be a human being with the totality of our experience of being human being, and also to me it speaks a little bit like Heidegger with his being with ourselves, being with each other, and being with the world. And we start from the premise that we want our life to have a meaning. So reality means something to me. I want my life to have to be meaningful. I want to occupy reality, and I want reality to occupy me. I want to engage with life. and I want to take opportunities that life throws at me. So we indicate willingness to take risks. I want to invest myself in reality. We want to be part of the reality, and I want to take stake in reality. So we want to shape the world. So these are the statements that one starts with. Bourdieu says that being is not a question of either or, but how much. So being as a willingness to engage with the world and the actual engagement with it. It's a relationship, it's a value, it's participation. As a concept, it rejects categorization in precise and concise terms. It's more like a mode of existence and all the outcomes that follow on. So being is seen as the function of fulfilling being. Then we've got an interesting one is linking being to capital. With which it shares characteristics. It lends itself to investment. Let me just see if I have that thing there. Oh, well, I've got it here, but it's small. So it lends itself to investment, it accumulates, it carries risk, and it can generate values. And then being is not just a matter of quantity, it also has intensity. So as you accumulate being, you accumulate intensity as well that's inherent to it. So it has quality in the process. And Marx also beautifully defines capital as value set in motion to generate more value. So similarly, you can think of being as being set in motion to generate more being. So it's a principle, it's a means, and it accumulates. And accumulation of being gives life a meaning. So human life is a process of accumulation of being, and that process gives life a meaning. And because it's a bit like investing, there are opportunities, and one takes a stake in the opportunity, and we invest with view to gain, but we can lose too. So it's a gamble, and we have to be open to this idea that we are supposed to do it, but there are some risks with regards to it. But the only way to gain anything is by entering into this relationship with reality through engagement, and that is being. And it is really a potential understood in the right context, and it's also a leap of faith. So you accumulate being by accumulating risk and uncertainty. So there's quite a lot of things here, and maybe each of these sentences have some kind of meaningful concepts. And I appreciate that I'm kind of like throwing them at you, but there's a lot in there. So we are playing basically a game with its rule, because that being that we are trying to project takes place in reality, and reality is guided by rules. And our compliance with the rules and playing in the spirit of the game rewards us, it gives back. Our being doesn't take place in the vacuum. It basically takes a place in society within social spaces, and there are more specifically defined as social fields. And social fields, let me just bring up a little bit. I'll just try to reduce. So social fields are structured social spaces which have their own rules, norms, and hierarchies, and they are arenas of social interaction and competitions where individuals actualize themselves and accumulate being. So being is relational and self-fulfillment currency. It's both investment and reward. And social fields are characterized by the schemes of domination and legitimate opinions. So they pretty much, through their structure, define themselves, and they define us, and they define our projections and trajectory in the world. So social fields are not merely containers for certain type of content and context, but also the very structure of how we interact with it, and how we make sense of it, and how we reflect on our relationships, and how we deal with truths, and what are the acceptance criteria that we have. So evaluation logic is also built into them, and into us. And fields are sets of manifestations of all the social agents that are involved, and the positions arising from the possession of relevant capital that is earned in other fields as well as within the field, and all the fields basically which are involved with the distribution of that capital. Let me just see where I am. So we have illusio, which is what makes individuals successful in specific social fields. And it is basically characterized by the capital that we accrue and the power that we gain as a result of the position in the field. Each of these fields has its own illusio, and that's the term that Bourdieu uses to describe the investment and belief that participants have in the value and importance of the field-specific stakes. So by our participation in a certain field, it's in our interest to maximize the value of the capital, the stakes that we actually have in that field. And fields are perpetuated by this investedness of its participants. We want to keep the investment yielding. Individuals and groups within a field are constantly vying for position and the accumulation of the various forms of capital that are most valued within that field. And then we've got capital in social field. We've got the traditional capital, which I'm not going to cover here, financial capital, and then we've got three types of capital, which are more to do with non-tangibles, really. So one of them is cultural capital, and that's the main type. It's basically the disposition of an individual, and it's relevant to a particular social field. A person would have different amount of cultural capital across different fields. It's the field that bestows this capital based on its rules and valorization mechanisms. And there is embodied cultural capital, which is everything we internalize through socialization. And there is institutionalized cultural capital, all the credentials and qualifications bestowed by the society. And there is objectified cultural capital, which is more to do with the physical objects. And then we have social capital, which I'm just going to open here, as I'm not sure if this is visible, but let me see if I can curse it. All right. So social capital is a particular type of capital that arises from our interactions with other people. One definition would be that it is a value, investable value of actual and potential resources that an individual or a group has access to through their network of social relationships. There is Robert Putnam saw it as a high level of social trust and reciprocity of civic engagement, and Coleman identified certain norms that this relationship imposes, and that one being the main one being of obligation and expectation, which is arising from our trust in a relationship that a favor that we rendered would be reciprocated. Then we also have symbolic capital, which is a bit of a murky a type, and I'm not quite clear where the lines of delineations are, but it is basically the prestige, honor, and recognition that one accrues within a social field. And you're being appreciated, respected, and valued, and it gives you self-esteem and satisfaction. So that is how we get rewarded, because it gives us meaning, and we earn appreciation. Social structures. Social structures are enduring and regular patterns of social arrangements and relationship that are shaped by a shape and the behavior and the relationship of individuals within the society. They're the underpinnings and the framework for the entirety of the society and social structures. So social structures here are a blueprint for everything. It's basically this the thing that holds the whole structure together, that sets the rules. And they have these characteristics where they're designed or they innately tend to reproduce themselves perpetually and to be resilient through the phenomenon of pre-reflexive form of knowledge. And it's a type of understanding or awareness that occurs prior to reflective thought or conscious analysis. So it's almost like we're downloaded with some stuff, and it becomes the fabric of who we are, and we are even unconscious of that. So our rational thinking cannot easily touch it. That is basically the idea. It is knowledge that is not a result of deliberate introspection or reasoning, but it is immediate and often non-conceptual. Pre-reflective knowledge is embodied and unconscious. It's similar to how we feel and perceive things before we reflect on them. So it's almost kind of like raw sensations and perceptions. And it's fundamental to all other forms of knowledge because it's part of how we process reality, reflect, think about experiences, and evaluate stuff. So social structures are reproduced through the action of individual participants who are themselves formed through the process, largely facilitated by this concept that Bourdieu introduces, which is called habitus. And habitus is a mechanism. I don't know. Let me just bring this up. Well. Habitus is a mechanism for social structures to reproduce themselves and reproduce their participants in order to make them suitable for the participation according to the rules of social fields and engage in the generation of different types of capital. That's how they move into society. Habitus is a structuring structure. It's kind of like an interesting way of saying that, probably trying to depict this dynamic process that's happening all the time. And it can also be described as disposition, which is a process, a fact, and a product relationship, and everything at once. And it's a process of creating individual and also the product, the individual themselves. So habitus is based on the internalization or embodiment of the social reality around us. It happens through socialization within certain fields or institutions, which are family, education, government, culture. And we internalize the norms, values, practices, and expectation of the social environment. So as a result of this internalization, we develop disposition, which are ingrained ways of thinking, feeling, perceiving, and active. So it's something really concrete, which is part of us. That is the idea here. And these dispositions are durable. And they are kind of like reproducible. They're faithful. They give almost a kind of determinate result, even though there is an aspect of agency and modularity to them. But by and large, they work in that way. And they're subconscious because they feel natural and they're taken for granted. So this is like an interesting thing, because what we actually feel is natural common sense, and kind of really believe that the entire world, that it's all based on some sort of logic, is by a large amount influenced by what we are fed and how we are put together by through this process of socialization and habitus. And basically, habitus contributes to the reproduction of social structures by predisposing individuals to act in ways that maintain status quo. So yeah, he doesn't want to change, basically. Then there is this, let me just see if I've got any. Okay, so we are misrecognition in society. So there's this concept of classes which happens there, and I don't take it necessarily as classes, and I think of them as ideologies. I think of them as dominant views, because they're kind of like sliced across verticals, which are these social fields, and it's very difficult, you know, to kind of define them precisely. So there are these different classes in the society, and the dominant class is basically trying to pass their own values and the ideology as common sense value, and that is called misrecognition in society. So there is mystification that is directly linked to the inability of non-dominant classes to see and understand the conditions of their own subjugation. So this is, I think, Marx's quote, but basically it alludes to simply people not even open to accepting that they're being manipulated, which is very interesting. Through education, for example, people participate in order to maximize their chances of getting access to the labor because they want a job. But the education at the same time is based on the principles of class relations, and through education, people reproduce these same structures. So kind of perpetuate this and normalize. And through habitus, individuals adopt pre-reflexive knowledge, and it's subconscious knowledge, and everything is taken for granted as normal. So dominant classes also are passing certain cultural taste as being good taste, as refined taste. Middle classes taste is driven by emulation of the dominant classes, and this is where the blurring of class boundaries takes place. So it's almost like these dominant classes are, in a way, impregnated the society with their taste, but they're kind of obfuscating the real origins of it. So it appears to be just good taste and nothing to do with the leading ideology. So working classes are left to play a catch-up game because they are mainly preoccupied with meeting their economic necessities. So the real distinction of the dominant class comes from privilege, access to wealth and education, but it appears to be innate, and with such advantage in terms of habitus and such wealth of various types of capital, these people dominate all spheres of life, and it's invisible. And this is all mirrored in the distribution of cultural practices and patterns of consumption. So there is struggle for the definition of common sense, which is ideology's terrain upon which this struggle is taking place. And subordinate classes are immersed in common sense, but at the kernel of the common sense is this pre-reflective sense, which I think Bourdieu calls bad sense, because it's really not common sense. It's basically manipulated idea of common sense. And there is now like a question, like how can anything be done? Who are the people who can actually see this mystification and rise above it and kind of like make a cogent theory and gather the following around it. And then there is this like role of intellectuals being introduced, but in fact, most intellectuals are simply not aware to understand the conditions of it because they're the product of this same system, which gives them pretty much everything, gives them the embodiment and embedding of everything, but also the ongoing reward in terms of their social place. And there's a mention of philosopher king, which is something that traditionally and culturally exists in French society, but it doesn't really exist in the rest of the West as some kind of dominant figure who is divorced from media, from the establishment, and from people, but kind of independently able to come to thing. There is an interesting concept of scholastic fallacy, which refers to particular types of intellectuals who appear to be very much concerned with framing arguments, primarily to support the pedantry of adherence to formal logic and the authority or field rules. And as a result of this style, the emphasis on complex argumentation and deliberation leads to much reduced output and the lack of urgency. Simpler truths are overlooked and more straightforward solutions are obscured because they follow certain protocol. And these intellectuals seem to be more applied to the preservation of the structure than in the direction of the research. Symbolic violence is the intention and ability of the dominant class to present the existing social hierarchy, their dominant worldviews and associated norms, values, and practices as justified on the basis of inherent properties of people or knowledge. And power is maintained and legitimized in society through the imposition of schemes of perception and thought, and it appears neutral and natural, but actually reflects and reinforces these power dynamics within fields. And then there is this introduction of doxa, which is like pretty much what I already explained. It's a set of beliefs and values taken for granted within the field, and that delineates the realm between what's thinkable and sayable. And then finally, how is change possible? Even though we are conditioned with all this embedded and embodied pre-reflexive knowledge, changes happen with social mobility because they happen when tensions arise between the actual field and the habitus, which is really kind of like interesting how it works. And there is a certain dissonance between individuals' ingrained dispositions and expectations, norms and demands of a particular social field. And social mobility, when people take their habitus from one field to another, which I've seen myself moving, doing different kind of work in various places, how it actually really helps see different perspectives because you're not totally conditioned by that habitus of that particular field. Fields transform over time themselves. There is an idea of personal development, there are generational changes, and I think that's it. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop this share.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was really interesting, and I can see a lot of connections to Second Renaissance themes. But yeah, I guess we might draw some of those out in the discussion now. Do you have a particular framing in mind for the conversation, or are you just opening it out now, Martin?
I'm really happy for people to ask questions and start some sort of discourse, whatever really interests them. But I think this is like pretty familiar stuff for most of you. You must have come across this. So.
Great. I mean, yeah, I'm not hugely familiar with Bourdieu myself, but I mean, I've vaguely come across him before, so it's really interesting to see some of these details spelled out. Yeah, I guess I'll think a bit more to formulate my question. So, Simon, go ahead.
Actually, yes, thanks. I was just going to ask you, Martin. I mean, what are your questions? What are the open issues for you here? I mean, it's an interesting presentation. I'm not familiar with Bourdieu myself, so this has been very informative for me. But what are the issues which arise out of your reading of Bourdieu, and what I mean, or alternatively, what do you see as relevant to life itself, to second Renaissance, and so forth?
For me, the most relevant thing here is the understanding what are the possibilities with regards to movement building, with regards to cohering and social change and transformation. And you can see basically that the battle itself is really not that simple. And it's not that simple because the movement itself and the leaders themselves might not be aware of the conditions that that basically rule this space, this social space. So again, something that I've addressed in quite a number of my sort of articles and posting, whether the developmental, psychological developmental strategies would really work with this regard, because it's a very similar problem that one has when trying to ascertain whether some ideas come from a higher place in terms of psychological development or the place below, because they simply do not have experience with it, because you can't know what you can't know. You can't be, your thinking can't be where you are not. So you're always trying to link it to something that you can recognize, and that is the past. And that takes me to another so it's almost kind of like it's a quality which is needed, which is this awareness, which few intellectuals have. So it's kind of like self inquiry really that's needed here. It's again, it's more about us and what we know about ourselves than what we know about the world. But thank you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking along similar lines, and trying to connect it to, I guess, some stuff we've discussed previously around like spiral dynamics. So I feel there's like some resonances there in the sense that in spiral dynamics, that part of what defines a particular stage is that it's sort of hard to get out of that stage. It sort of defines a whole way of thinking, and it's when you're in a stage, it's sort of hard to understand the higher stages, which kind of sounds similar to what you were saying. And I guess that kind of stage model also implicitly defines what would count as self-development then, as sort of moving from one stage to a higher stage, which yes, it seems like something you could translate into the terms of Bourdieu, where you're moving from one social field to another. And so yeah, it may be helpful to think about the various social fields that we have in contemporary society as including these different stages from the spiral dynamics point of view. So it might include sort of green postmodern social fields and sort of more scientific modern social fields, for example, and you could move from one to the other, and it maybe includes a meta-modern social field, which we may be in right now. So yeah, I wonder if that makes sense from your point of view. And maybe I saw on your diagram you had like a line for self-development, which you didn't really go into in detail, and I wonder if it ties into that as well.
Um, Thanks, John. Like with regards to self-development, I also wrote an article about self-actualization, which really put a spanner in the works, which I expected. So that is kind of like my consideration as well. It is a little bit of we can't really scale it up like that because it needs to it needs to give birth, and it gives birth for reasons that we don't necessarily understand at the moment. So this awakening, this transcendence, this overcoming is not something we have a formula for. And I have seen these developmental theories, and I understand the spirit of them. I'm just simply not convinced. So my approach would be to try and locate these people who have spontaneously managed to transcend and try to build the core around them rather than going from the grassroots upwards. And a big problem with all this thing is this common sense definition. And I'm just kind of wondering, because even within our little circle of dedicated research people who are pretty much familiar with this stuff, and we pride ourselves on being able to rationally reflect on the world and ourselves, but marrying of these different or synthesis of different perspectives seems almost impossible. There is always certain type of judgment which appears to be common sense, right? Just as 1 + 1 is 2, but it actually does not work like that. So certain type of empathy where one is able to get out of themselves, like almost like step out of those confines of this social conditioning is needed. And we know that some people have ability. That's what Bourdieu is talking about. So I hope this answers to some.
Yeah, go ahead,
Johnny?
Johnny.
Thank you very much for the talk. Just on that point, have you in your life met anyone who you think falls into that box of having stepped outside things? And if so, how did they do it? You know.
Thanks, Johnny. Well, I don't think it's a binary kind of like a switch, really. Like everybody's on the spectrum. I mean, I can give you some examples which I've been sort of wondering about. We purchased a property in Italy, and basically when we asked for structural engineer and for a solicitor, they thought that that is something that they don't do, and said like, why would you want a structural engineer? Like the building is there, you can see it for yourself. Or like, why would you need your own solicitor? Because notary takes care of the interests of both parties. So what is common sense to us, totally common sense, that you need structural engineer, it's just a social construct, really. And it's a fantastic kind of way of looking. And then when I talk to people about that, I've got probably about like 20, 30 different examples of this absurdity. Some people would find it absurd, and some people would be able to see both sides. And they can see that maybe potentially like the risk has been overinflated to basically furnish arguments for particular narrative. So yes, there are people who can deal, but there are some people who simply cannot. And it's nothing to do with the education. It's nothing to do with the intelligence. It's just the strength of this habitus that some people seem to hold, which is addressed in meta-modernism as, you know, holding tension, holding things lightly, being open-minded, allowing things to invade your space and being open to changes. Thanks. Hope this answers the question.
If there's no one else we're eager to contribute, I'd like to stick in another, stir things up a little bit, actually, because I'm kind of hearing and I'm not hearing something at the same time. I'm hearing a bit of narrative like you don't see the world as it really is, or they don't see the world as it really is. And then on the other hand, I'm hearing a more, what I see as more of a meta-modern approach that, well, indeed, missing. I'm seeing people missing out the postmodern recognition, which we're transcending and including, that there is not one grand narrative. There is not just one way of looking at the world. There isn't this is how it really is. But there are, but the ways of seeing things as you think they are can be valuable in various different ways. So I just want to sort of like throw that into the pool, really. Throw that into the pool as a kind of Discomfort. I kind of feel a tension here.
I think it's an interesting question whether Bourdieu is a postmodernist. I mean, he's obviously writing in that milieu. But yeah, to the extent that he seems to be saying that he's kind of in the Marxist tradition, which is sort of positing a capitalist substructure for everything, and presumably he's positing that as sort of objectively existing, and that actually understanding that is a truer truth than the sort of illusion that you get if you're just in the bad sense of uh, ordinary life that's been informed by that general overall structure. So that might be a sort of gesture towards metamodernism, where you're establishing a hierarchy there. If you can recognize the capitalist structure behind everything, then
on the other hand, I would say, to give some credit here, I think I would say that if you haven't recognized what, for example, Marx says, then you're missing out on something. It's not that what Marx says is true or what Bourdieu says is true, but it's just that if you haven't actually absorb that in some way or taken account of it, then you're kind of not quite, you maybe haven't got the richness of diversity of thinking or something. I don't know. Somebody else help me here.
I mean, I'm curious to know, Martin, whether you think Bourdieu offers a kind of positive sort of solution. Does he recommend that people try and break out of their social fields and sort of develop in some way, or is it kind of quite a pessimistic conclusion that actually we're just doomed to reiterate the existing structures that we find around us?
Well, I'm only ever interested in things that give me insight, and I almost view everything in positive terms, because even if it's negative, it gives me an impetus and triggers me to see the solution. And I can see the solution here, and the solution is always the same. You have to build capacities. And it's only a matter of what the capacities are. So the first thing is to actually understand what those capacities are. And the capacities have been defined even in this meta-modern space, but there is very little work towards trying to source those capacities, because you can think of them like people. You are sourcing people. That is the capacity. So if you're thinking, or ideas, that's what you're looking for. So really, you're looking for capacity to think of good ideas, to solve problems, and then you've got the implementation side. So it's pretty much like really real world. There is it's not different than how some other arenas operate. But that is for me all important. That's why I kind of push for that. Like, who are we? What can we do? What have we done? Like, measure, see what we are capable of, and what is the stuff that we don't have but think we might need, like that sort of stuff.
That's interesting, because I guess I would have thought that part of the solution would be establishing a new social field. So I was surprised that you didn't mention that. And I guess that's perhaps part of the way the Second Renaissance is defined, right? Is establishing
He does that. He mentions that, yeah.
Okay, right, yeah.
He calls it like that. We need a social system within a social system, and obviously that is what we are. The thing about that is you cannot be subversive. You can't be openly subversive. So you have to find a really good way of attracting the actors that already have positions in within that kind of field of power, and not just get anyone who agrees with us, because there's a danger that those people might not be of any use. So don't focus. I'm just saying, don't spend huge amount of resources without evaluating how far you can get with a certain strategy. So that is like my thing. And effective altruism is a very good example of that. like how to appeal to somebody who's got what we need for to deploy it in the direction of. So it's a very good thinking in that direction. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, that seems useful. I guess I had in mind more just, you know, that it's that the social field is crucial because without that community, in a sense, or social field, the individual is sort of left to the mercy of some other social field, which then defines their thinking and habitus. And so you need that actual new social field where there's a new norms, new ways of thinking that become common sense in order to self-actualize or in order to have self-development. But yeah, I guess you were talking more about how do you impact the wider society, or how do you expand that social field beyond the circle that it starts in.
I'd love to hear from others, by the way. But, yeah.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have any comments or thoughts?
Go on, be bold, please. I'd love to hear from other people.
I mean that's fine. I mean, if not, I mean we're coming up on 10 minutes to the end. But we could perhaps start to think about progressing some of this. I guess we've already sort of touched on the connections to what we're already working on, and I feel like it's been really useful in sort of showing particular ways that actually Bourdieu is relevant to what we're trying to do in Second Renaissance, and that could be sort of expanded on theoretically. I think, like, you know, I'd love to see you, for example, Martin, like developing this into a piece that applies Bourdieu's ideas to some of the themes in the Second Renaissance white paper, for example.
Yeah, I was going to say, basically, I wanted to talk about social capital, but I didn't talk about it because I think that is one of the hidden opportunities, really. That's where real strength is, incredible strength, incredible power that is actually not being utilized anywhere else except in corruption. That is what keeps the corruption going. It's incredibly powerful, cohesive material that is simply underutilized, and that's where, in my opinion, all the money should go there. That is where the strength is, and that goes into what Simon is passionate about as well, and that goes into this interpersonal relationship and you know, relating more closely with each other, cohering. That is the real meat, and that's what I would like to write more about. And there's all sort of underlying stuff that goes into intimacy and love and friendships and stuff like that. And it's so deep that it's unbelievable. And it's kind of like an open goal to score, in my opinion, especially in this context. It's like mega powerful. Co-living falls into the same, roughly the same area.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that sort of struck me listening to it was talking about these different kinds of capital, so social capital, cultural capital. It's something that Hansi Freinach does as well, actually, in his books, and I guess it's more from the point of view of what counts as being egalitarian, is that you want to have a more equitable society with respect to all these kinds of capital. So you want more people to be able to acquire cultural capital or sexual capital or spiritual capital. So yeah, I just wonder if that's another interesting sort of connection to like meta-modern ideas that could be explored. That might be something I'm interested in exploring.
I'm just sensing that capital is one way of looking at things, and I think there are lots of people who I know who wouldn't think in terms of capital at all.
I think capital is defined dynamically as something that spins in order to produce more of itself, and it's, I think, kind of like a beautiful metaphor, and there's a little bit of mysticism behind it as well, just to acknowledge that there is certain perpetuum mobile going on there, and it points or hints at some sort of divine quality to it. That's what it what it does. Obviously, like in the original sense, not, but that is how it's being used here. It's being used as something that can do miracles in terms of, it has huge amount of potential. That's what it is, really. And you just feed it. So that's why we're using being. Being effectively is a type of capital. It's like a certain investment that yields. And it's always the same ingredients. There is risk, there is reward, there is leap of faith. It just connects to so many things. And that's why it's useful as a concept.
I would agree. I would agree with very much something that actually wants to grow itself. I would identify that as love, I think, basically. What I don't see is love is I don't see love being accumulated. And I think that's where my ontology there differs a little bit from the people that use the word capital, because capital goes along with the idea of accumulation. I think you mentioned that earlier in your talk, Martin. And accumulation goes along with inequality, and that's a tricky one.
I mean,
not to deny inequality in principle. It's just that, like, accumulated inequality can be hard, can be awkward.
I mean, thinking again about the analogy with Freinacht, I guess you could say that the accumulative element links to the idea of development in a particular dimension. So, you can improve your social capital by developing along the dimension of sociality, and likewise with other dimensions. Yeah, it's a bit harder to see how you could develop along a dimension of love, but perhaps not that hard, in a certain way.
I think
yeah,
that love lends itself to accumulation, I believe. Just instinctively thinking about it, I would say it does. It just normatively and societally constrained to fit, to live in a certain cage. So it's almost kind of love needs to be liberated in a way. I'm just talking conceptually.
Okay, we should maybe bring it to a close now. So yeah, I think there's been some really good ideas and suggestions for future research. So yeah, thanks again, Martin. Really interesting talk. And yeah, do we just briefly sort of check out with how we're feeling? Yeah, I think I've said how I feel about the talk. It's gone great. And yeah, lots of new ideas, and I might look into Bourdieu a bit more. Pass on to Martin.
Well, thanks for listening to my presentation. It wasn't what I aimed to do, but at the last moment I thought I'd just change it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Simon?
Yes, thank you. Very, quite stimulating, and kind of like, it's nice because it's kind of gets me itching a little bit. Think, what do I really, what is, am I uncomfortable in this? If so, why? So that's all very kind of productive. But thank you, Nicholas. Maybe Nicholas may not be here because he said he was. Oh yeah, you are great.
I'm not really. I'm driving. I just happen to be in
okay.
traffic right now. I've been listening, and there's stuff I really want to say, but it's been a bit difficult to say it. And maybe I can say something quickly right now, which is that I it struck me while I was hearing this that maybe things have changed since the time that Bourdieu was writing this.